All right, so thanks very much for the introduction. What we wanted to start the panel talking about was basically giving you guys a bit of insight into the path whereby new researchers are finding their way into this field and into thinking about these questions. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to go through and basically tell us a little bit of their story that sort of brought them up here onto this stage. So in particular, can you guys talk to us about what's the path that you took to this field? What were you doing before you decided to start doing research in this area? What motivated you to come into this area? And what were the concerns that you had as you considered this as a research endeavor? So with that, El Mhamdi, if you will take, or
okay, sure.
Sure, Smitha, you can start.
All right, well, is this on? Yeah, okay. So I'm a second-year PhD student at Berkeley right now, but I also did my undergrad at Berkeley. So in 2015, I guess I was a second-year undergrad, and I happened to live in this big house where one of my friends in the house started this class on effective altruism at Berkeley. So I would occasionally show up, and one day they were talking about existential risk and AI risk, and it was my first time I ever heard of this. So naturally, I thought it was crazy. And I got into a debate with some people there, and I don't think they made that great of arguments in the moment, but people kept deferring me to this book. They were like, oh, but have you read Superintelligence? And so I was like, all right, let me go check this out, see what it is. And so I read Superintelligence, and then I was like, okay, I get the abstract argument, maybe I don't agree with the paths or whatever, but I get what they're saying. But that still sort of stayed in the back of my head as kind of interesting but sci-fi-y until the next year in 2016. I took this class on human compatible AI that was taught by Stuart Russell, Anka Dragan, Tom Griffiths. I think Jaime was in it, and you were in it too, Dylan. And that was the first time I saw oh, there's actually real research you can do on this, concrete things. In particular, I think one thing Stuart said in the first or second day really stood out to me. It was we always assume we have this reward function, but where does the reward function come from? God? And I was like, oh my God, this is true. What is God? What is the reward function? And then I got really interested in the actual problems. I got really interested in value alignment. And it just seemed it was really fascinating, an area that was really new and had these really high-level vague notions, but there's just a lot of interesting conceptual work to be done. More so than if I was working on something else, I could work on improving bounds on bandit algorithms or something. But this was just more fascinating, interesting to me. And so then that summer was when Chai started, and that's kind of how I got into it. But I kind of the thing I want to highlight from the story is although I first heard about this through the effective altruism-y, rationalist-y communities, the thing that actually got me into it was the academic opportunity to work on it. So I think the academic legitimization of the field has been really important, and concretization to real things.
Great. Thanks, Smitha. Mahdi, if you want to go next.
Yeah, I arrived initially from physics. So I graduated in physics back in 2011. I worked for 4 years at least. And I worked first in physics research as an engineer. And then I started a science YouTube channel in Morocco. And so I was doing a lot of science communication, tutoring material like Khan Academy style, and then, yeah, eventually it's become an EPFL project in French and English. But that period got me exposed to CS, to computer science, computing in general, as a fundamental science of which I was not aware of. And I think this is a problem in the natural sciences community, in the social sciences community, and as well in the CS community. People in CS, including top researchers, are not aware that this field, computing, started as a natural science. The most cited paper of Alan Turing is on morphogenesis. So I started a PhD with this motivation. Let's make computer science and natural science again. And yeah, my topic was to study robustness of biological processes, which is still half of my job. And at some point, looked at ML, machine learning, and say, yeah, I'm in the distributed computing group. They do a lot of robustness research. Let's just mix up the 30 years perspective of distributed computing robustness into machine learning. And somehow I got into the basin of AI safety research. I'll just say, as an aspiring natural philosopher, which I still aspire to be, I'd like to try and to make a career under the slogan, Bostrom in the trenches. So there was this rant against Nick's book by some famous AI researcher saying that we down there in the trenches of AI research and then got into ranting against Nick's book. I think it's a very good thing that we have a generation of post-truths in the trenches. People who think like a natural philosopher and who are close to boring stuff like convex optimization and stochastic gradient descent.
I'll say I think convex optimization is super exciting, but
Certainly is.
it's well taken. All right, Jaime, will you go next?
Great. So I came to this field from the origins of control theory and engineering. And really, I've been interested in safety for a very long time. It's just, I've started looking at this kind of safety only more recently. And my earlier work had to do with, well, we're building increasingly complex systems, many of which are automated. And they're starting to go from very controlled environments and factory floors to really more deployed systems like self-driving cars and drones. And these systems are having to interact with an increasingly complicated world, and most importantly, they're starting to interact with people. And so how can we extend the guarantees that we are more or less comfortable with writing for systems that operate inside of a cage to systems that are no longer in a cage and systems that are actually interacting with very squishy and wobbly things called humans that we can very rarely say anything specific or clear-cut about. And so that was the motivation that took me to Berkeley to start my PhD in robotics and control theory, trying to extend safety guarantees to more complicated systems that also interacted with humans. And through this path, I started looking more into, well, how do we model human cognitions? How do we figure out what humans are up to and what they're trying to do? And through this, I started interacting with Tom Griffiths first, who's a professor in cognitive science, and then with Anka Dragan once she joined Berkeley. And we started thinking a lot about the connection between safety guarantees for systems that have to operate with humans, but also having a better model of what humans are up to and what they're trying to do. And through this, I got exposed to problems like value alignment. And through the class that Smitha mentioned, where some of us were there and we were having reading papers and having discussions about the different aspects of and safety considerations for AI systems, I started to get a bit of a longer-term perspective where you realize that, yes, as these systems become increasingly capable and they start to interact with an increasingly complicated world, it's going to become more and more difficult to analyze them or to write easy guarantees about how they're going to behave. And so I think that was the angle that motivated me to start looking at the longer-term problems. And I think some of the concerns that you have there is, well, it seems, and perhaps we'll talk about this a little bit more later, it seems that some of these problems are very vague by construction because we're trying to give guarantees about technologies that are not quite here yet, and there's a lot of unknowns about what they're going to be like. So I think coming from the perspective of safety guarantees, where you're always trying to make very specific statements about your systems and what their structure is going to be, how they're going to be constructed, and projecting those forward in time to technologies that we have a lot of uncertainty about, is one of the big challenges that you face when you try to enter this field.
Great. Thanks, Jaime. And William, if you can finish it up.
Hi. So I came into this field, I think, first from the perspective of effective altruism and wanting to do something that would be useful for the long-term future. So I think it was 5 or 6 years ago at the end of my undergraduate degree, I was wanting vaguely to do something that was useful with my computer science education, and I started Googling and then ran across this research area and started reading about it. And we sort of just read about it and digested it, became fascinated about the problem of AGI. But it took a bit of time to digest that, and also for I think to get some more clarity around what the arguments were and how they related to current machine learning. So things like superintelligence and the concrete problems paper and some of the early sort of machine learning, concrete implementation, like let's look at this problem in like a concrete system kind of work came out. And then I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to do an internship with Owain Evans at the Future of Humanity Institute and work on a technical AI safety paper that was in like the context of like Atari reinforcement learning systems, but like trying to like build something that could learn like that could sort of like learn constraints to like keep an agent from doing something that was like catastrophic during the training procedure. And like I think this, yeah, like from there I ended up applying to the University of Toronto and started working with Roger Gross and was lucky to like find a place where there were where there are like several professors now who are actually at this conference and are interested in the concept of AGI and looking at things from that perspective. So in terms of things about what I was worrying about when applying to the program, it was sort of like, is this something that like, I think I started off being like, is this something that I can like actually contribute to? This all seems like very vague and abstract and like difficult like conceptual work, and then seeing some of the like concrete research that was done sort of helped with that. And then I guess just like whether I would be able to like go into somewhere like academia and be able to work on problems that were like motivated by AGI and be like, you know, yes, this is like my motivation that I'm like thinking about these systems that like we don't have today, whether that would like be accepted or like perceived as something weird.
Great. So I think one of the things that really came out for us in discussions, in preparing for this panel and seeing what we really wanted to share was that we all feel like we've had some interesting experiences of what it's like being a student in this area. And we've talked with a lot of people about the importance of attracting new talent and new researchers and thinking about what we're going to be, you know, where does the next generation of AI safety researchers come from? And so to that end, I thought it would be great to get some examples from the panelists of basically challenges that you've faced in this area and also the benefits that you've faced from being here. What have you found from working on this problem that has been positive for you in your experience? So maybe we'll reverse the order from the previous one and we'll start with William on that one.
Okay. So I think in terms of challenges that I've faced, I think one big challenge is that like, again, trying to look at sort of the long term of like systems that don't exist, and also like being in sort of like a field that's at an early stage of development where like we sort of don't have like the MNIST of AI safety, like the problem that's like concrete and well-defined, and we know that if we like do really well on this problem that like we would have like solved like AI safety or something. It feels like I'm more at the stage where I have to figure out like what are the problems that we could solve, and like defining those. And it also is, you know, it feels like I didn't sort of like come in and like you know, have like, you know, find a professor who was like, this was you know, here's this like concrete research project to start out. It feels like sort of like we're all in kind of the same boat of like trying to like define the field. And so like, yeah, figuring out how to define things and then like also like being confident that like the research that I'm doing is like useful rather than just going off in like some weird direction has been a challenge. I think in terms of, yeah, like things that have helped me are like being able to work with the sort of part of the AI safety community that's not within academia or like not in like the traditional academic setup. So for example, for my research now that's trying to look at iterated amplification, I've been like collaborating with researchers at OT, with like Andreas Stuhlmüller, and trying to get some, you know, having some like direction from like that part of the field in like shaping my research to be like useful to them and being able to learn from their perspectives.
Great.
So yeah, I think, and this is probably something that essentially all of us have in common, but definitely the fact that the questions that we're trying to answer are often, you know, sort of high level and at the beginning feel a little bit vague because there's so much uncertainty around the systems that we're trying to prove properties about. And I think that it's important, and for me it was a bit of a challenge to reconcile the kind of work that you've been doing so far and the sort of philosophy of your own research that you're trying to maintain with the fact that you're now trying to apply it to a field that is very much in its early stages and where you are where you're trying to make statements about something that is still in a very fuzzy state. And I think that this also projects onto something that I think needs to start happening a little bit more consistently, which is, in general, we, as a field, to gain academic legitimacy, we need to start, not to start, that's not fair. We need to focus more on providing concrete and tangible solutions to problems. And speculation is, of course, necessary, and it's important given that we are at a very early stage, but it can't be a substitute for concrete results, concrete solutions. Theoretical results, I think, are best at this stage, and they need to be general enough that they will admit the variation that we still don't know about, and that we will sort of gradually discover as we move forward into the future. But they can't be too generic in to the extent of being trivial statements or essentially not useful ones. So I think that was a struggle that I had at the beginning, sort of trying to focus not only on concrete problems, but concrete solutions that I could give to those problems. I think we've done a fairly okay job, I think, as the technical side of the field at defining concrete problems. But I think the solutions also need to be concrete, and that sometimes is a bit of a challenge. And personally, I found that having the CHI group emerge at Berkeley was very useful because it gave me the ability to start grounding my thoughts and bouncing my ideas off of other people who are also thinking critically about these sorts of problems. And that was a very useful thing to have. Although I also have to say, on the other hand, I think a good thing that CHI has is that every person who is a member of CHI is also really a member of some other lab that is doing technical research on other aspects of the field. And I think keeping our work grounded in the field of AI, robotics, control theory is also important, and really is something that hopefully will help establish AGI, technical AGI safety as a field of engineering.
Great. Mahdi?
Okay, so yeah, I would just want to acknowledge the fact that in terms of challenges, we remain a lucky generation compared to maybe Stuart's generation or people before us. It's relatively easy.
Sorry, Stuart.
So yeah, so thank you for making it easy for us. And yeah, so we have for example, you can be out of the field, not even in ML, and stumble upon a lot of internet resources, for example, YouTube video. I mentioned YouTube, like podcasts. And also we have a receptive community. Now we can publish our work, and by being concrete, so I will just skip the concreteness part of my, and yeah, what I mentioned earlier, those computing, people doing computing and learning as a natural science. We also have role models on that, like Josh Tenenbaum or Yoshua Benji, a bit of that, and Leslie Valiant or Nancy Lynch. Those are people who are already preparing the field for us. So we are lucky. What still remains are the taboos. There are still some taboos among our peers, machine learning researchers, very senior, very respected ones, and just remind them how taboos slow down progress. So if we look at history, parts of the world was stuck when it was putting a taboo on philosophy and natural philosophy. And the Islamic world, for example, somehow emerged by just giving some freedom to a bunch of blue sky philosophers in Baghdad doing philosophy and natural sciences. But then as soon as the Islamic world started as well tabooing them and burning the books and doing censorship, the Islamic world got stuck and stopped making progress, and then we're now this just accelerated the end of them. So taboos slow down progress. There are still some taboos, but I just want to highlight one thing: people who are making those taboos there and trying without being malicious, censoring the kind of AGI safety research, are not necessarily bad. They don't necessarily have bad intentions. So I just want to conclude by this Moroccan proverb. They say like you have the stork, this bird with a long beak. We say that when the stork wants to kiss the baby loses the eye. So I think some of our peers and senior people just want us good things. Like they want us to secure careers, publish NeurIPS and ICML papers, which we should do and which we're trying to do. But out of good intentions, sometimes you can slow down progress by putting some taboos. So I think we should keep working hard on getting rid of those taboos so that we make progress in science.
Thanks. And Smitha?
Sure. I think a lot of people have focused on challenges, so I'm going to kind of focus on the reverse side and think about advantages. So like Jaime and the vagueness kept coming up. It's true that these problems are really vague, but I also think on the other hand, because they're vague, they're very interesting. There's a lot of conceptual work to be done, and it's not like an advisor can just hand you a super concrete problem. But I almost think that's a good thing because like everybody learns how to solve problems, but picking the problems is kind of the hard part. And then I also think that thinking about the long term is a really good way to think about problems. So people often say you want to create solutions that generalize across tasks, but I also think there's this sort of generalization across time. Like as there are more resources, like systems have more resources, would the solutions that we have now be as robust later on? And so, I mean, I personally am very interested in both the short term and long term, both just because I think short term is important and also because I don't really trust things that are for the long term but don't also have some kind of short term payoff. And so I like to think of that generalization as how I can make my research more robust along that time scale. And then thirdly, I think that this community I actually like a lot. Like often in fields where there are a lot of competing paradigms, people's egos really get ruffled and so on. But I think maybe because of founder effects of the field, like an advantage of having a lot of people who are just sort of like defer to the logic of the argument is that you can have widely varying ideas and a lot of speculation, but still like coherent discussions.
Great. And I really want to echo that point about creating narratives and being able to tell students about what feels good and what is exciting about being in this area. I really think that we all want to think about like how do we get the next group of this panel up here so that there aren't 3 people from Berkeley, right? How do we sort of make it so that there's a much broader set of folks feeding into this diverse and important research area. With that, I want to open up the panel to questions from the audience. And in particular, I'd like you guys to focus on questions related to technical research directions you think are interesting for us.
From students first.
And in particular, I want to call on students first, because this is the first panel. This is a student panel, so you guys get first go.
From David Kruger.
Exactly.
Hi, guys. So I want to put forth my opinion and see what you think about it. I think we should probably focus at least a decent amount of resources on very short timelines, not because they're necessarily likely, but because we don't have enough information to completely rule them out, or rule them out like, with sufficiently high confidence. And I think in very short timelines, reward modeling is basically the best approach because it really fits in well with what everyone is doing in DeepRL right now. And that's sort of the justification that I gave myself for signing off on that paper that I did with Jan, where we say like this is the highest impact or like the most important thing to be pursuing right now. And I think it's just because in the short timelines we have some chance that this would work, even though I think it probably won't. There's still some chance we kind of get lucky, and it turns out that AIs just learn the right concepts and like don't and that learning to be corrigible and stuff like that is actually pretty easy. So I think until we have maybe a whole like team working on that, which is sort of what Jan's trying to build, I think that's what I think I would tell somebody who's like asking what should I work on right now in alignment. And I'm curious if you guys would agree, or if not, why.
I would like to take it with this next A and B, I think.
Okay, we'll start with Mahdi.
Yeah, I'd also like to say something like, I was using my natural philosopher hat, but actually in my daytime, I'm like a very engineering-oriented person. And I think something this community in particular has to do better at is that sometimes we have a AI safety problem X for which there is a motivation and technical formulation A and a motivation and technical formulation B. A is short-term and B is long-term. Always prefer A first, at least to convince other researchers that it matters, because like the solution would work for both. I'll just like give 2 examples, like poisoning. We have it today, anti-vaccine propaganda on social media. We have like, poisoning against democracy, and like safe interoperability. Okay, safe interoperability is also a problem we have now with addiction to social media is a safe interoperability people where we're not able to switch off Instagram. So always keep this, and the good news is that those are areas on which I personally, with a bunch of friends, have made significant technical progress, which is good to know and like to build upon. So I think we have to keep an eye on like both short-term, long-term, and don't like always go back and forth between the two.
So on that note, something I kind of forgot to say is I think that's actually another appealing property of looking at reward modeling, is that it is something that's going to be useful for all sorts of examples of narrow alignment, and like already people are really starting to recognize much more broadly in the machine learning community that we can't write down reward functions for really basic tasks that we care about getting our systems to do.
Yeah, so if I...
Sure.
Right.
Well,
so if I can pick up on that, so I think I agree. I certainly agree with some of the points that you're making. I think reward modeling is important. It's actually important not only if you believe that there's a good chance of a short timeline for extremely advanced or AGI systems, but also to the extent that we are producing increasingly capable AI systems and systems that are interacting more and more with humans, even during the ramp by which they start to increase the kinds of tasks that we can assign to them. I think it is important that they're able to be flexible in interpreting what it is that the user wants. So Anka has been doing some research where you have robots that are helping you in the home. They're nothing close to super intelligent, but it is important to develop good methods for these systems to work well, to interface well with people, and to figure out what it is that people are trying to tell them. And a very important thing that comes up when you're trying to do this kind of work is that these systems need to be cognizant of the fact that they probably don't have a perfect model of what the human is trying to do. And I think it's something that's still going to be true once we get to extremely high levels of intelligence. And so giving these systems the ability to be humble when necessary and to acknowledge that maybe they're not quite sure what the human wants, I think it's going to be a very important part of making these systems robust not only in the near and medium term, but also in the long term.
Are you putting that forward as something in addition to reward modeling, separate from reward modeling, a reason why reward modeling is important?
So what I would say is that reward modeling needs to have this humility component in it. And any sort of reward modeling that would allow a system to ultimately believe that now it has a good model of the reward and it can just go forward and essentially ignore the human from now on, I think it's going to be a very dangerous system. It's going to lose, of course, the corrigibility property. I don't know if you wanted to pitch in as well, so I don't want to monopolize the answer.
So I guess, on the point of the recursive reward modeling, I think I've been seeing, one of the things out of thinking about at this conference, I've been seeing more parallels between that and maybe the AI services approach and the iterated amplification approach and how they kind of fit into somewhat similar models with different angles, and thinking about that. And I think on some of the short and long-term relationship things, I think this sort of doing reward modeling better, I think is also the better, more scalable solution to some of the near-term issues that people are talking about today. So I think if I look at something like fairness, I think that the wrong approach is to go and write down what is the one equation that defines what fairness is, and let's make a system that does that. And the right approach is to the approach that's going to scale better in the long term is figure out how to learn what fairness is and how to make trade-offs in this complex space of what that value is.
Can I say one thing on that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, and I think reward modeling is really important, but it seems to me a thing that we need to do to make progress is to understand make this reward more structured in some way. And I think maybe we need to draw on cognitive science insights more or something, but there's this extreme of building in the fairness function to learning it completely, and there's somewhere in between, and I can't figure out how to get to that in between.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. With that, I think Tegan, or yeah.
I'm curious what you guys think about ethics review boards or some analogous structure, or like what is wrong with ethics review boards that we shouldn't have that. Maybe something like standard section of every paper that is ethics acknowledgement section. But I just think I want something in machine learning to make it very default and normal for everybody to think about the ethical and social implications of their research. And I'm curious what you guys think is the best way to do that.
Does anyone want to jump on that first?
Yeah. I think, yeah, like the idea of making it sort of standard to include information on like things like ethics, or I would think of like scalability to like long-term systems. Just like being clear in your paper, like whether this algorithm, like you have thought about fairness, or whether just like you have not thought about fairness at all, or whether this algorithm you've like thought about how it will scale to like long-term systems, or like you haven't thought about this, and so you should not apply this in a case where you're like, you're using like a vastly more capable system than like you had when the paper was written.
I think given how internal review boards normally work in universities, this seems to be something that usually comes out of the researchers themselves. The university sometimes can establish requirements for certain types of research. For example, every time we do an experiment where we have human participants, we have to go through the university's internal review board, and there we do have to do all the considerations about how is this affecting the participants, and also what are the sort of positive implications that we're hoping to get out of the research. For general machine learning research, I think this is not usually the case, and if it is to become the case, I think it probably, at least in its initial stages, it would have to sort of come out of the research community. Probably not only this. I certainly think that it wouldn't hurt to have more, to have it become a more extended thing for ML researchers and AI researchers in general, think about the technical implications of their work and actually and include it as part of their paper. Similar, but I think of this in a similar way to how I think about the replicability and the open sourcing of the code that you used and giving all the meta, the hyperparameters for your experiments. I think it's a matter of good scholarship almost, and it would be great if it became part of the research culture. Absolutely.
All right, I think we're going to have time for one more question. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Are you concerned about external pressures from academia and from publication on your epistemics related to research prioritization? And if so, what can be done about it?
I have a negative answer, but maybe somebody wants to start with a positive one.
I have a positive answer. I think the model of peer reviewing and convincing your peer, like, it remains one of like the worst, the least bad models we have. Yeah, so it's like the least bad model we have so far is this. I think we should keep up, like, for now. I think it's important to go fight in the peer review and convince your peers and go to ICML and NeurIPS and get your paper accepted and present it, etc. It's still pragmatic, because this is how you will get the workforce joining you on that problem. This is at least how it works. It worked for us while we were like almost getting, like, starting out of the blue. We are not part of the SHI or like all the famous AI technical safety research groups. Dylan said that we have to work more to make this panel containing a more diverse set of people, not all like three from Berkeley. It's a good thing. Like, you were pioneers, so why not? Like, you should keep on being lead in the research work. But to answer Max's concern that we have to connect what we are saying now to the action items. I think one of the things that talks to my heart a lot is we have to, as well as you said, we have to get single groups less overrepresented here when you're talking about Berkeley. We have also to make sure, like, in technical AI safety, there is a ratio of out of academia researchers that you can't find in I don't know, chemical reactions, like organic chemistry or whatever other field of research, you would have a high ratio of people from academia. And I think that's very healthy because it allows a lot of freedom. For example, some things you can't really, whatever freedom you can get today, and I'm aware that some industrial groups give a lot of freedom to their researchers, there are some things you just cannot do if you're not in academia. I personally want to collaborate with social scientists. I'm trying to do that with a colleague from Sciences Po. And I think if it was from an industrial group, he would just like not talk to me because like, yeah, you have data on people and what do you want to do with this research with me and like what I'm going to do for you. So there are some things you can't start outside academia, and we should make sure that something like, people say the CERN for AI research, something on that scale should be created and generously funded so that a generation of people like us could go there and play the multiplying role that academia plays, because like this is where you can multiply the workforce on interest in science, natural science topics. So.
Great. So I absolutely agree with what you're saying. That was going to be my negative answer, essentially. So no, I'm not concerned about peer review. I believe very strongly in peer review, and I think that one of the worst mistakes that this community could make would be to turn its back on the rest of the academic research in artificial intelligence and machine learning and automation science. I think that we need to become ingrained and well established as part of the general effort in the development of AI. And I think that the right way to do this is to convince our peers to have an well-argued debate with them. And I don't believe in backdoors for this. I think we should enter the academic publications through the front door of peer review.
I would also add that I don't think the pressure is as much as it seems, because whether or not your research is short-term or long-term is not based on the motivation section of the paper. It's not based on whether you cited Bostrom in the introduction. And in fact, I feel like just as a computer vision paper, it's kind of strange for you to be like, our goal is to get systems to see. It's also kind of strange to be like, when our goal is to have AGI, and then your paper is about safe exploration RL or something. And so I think that there's a lot that you can do about framing that makes the publication process a lot easier. Also, I think that I personally am skeptical of long-term solutions that don't have some sort of short-term output. Not that right now there needs to be a solution to fairness that comes out of your value alignment problem, but it should be related. I don't really quite believe that all of a sudden super intelligence happens and then there are these new problems that are totally created. I haven't yet seen a problem that doesn't have some sort of soft version. Mm-hmm. So I think that actually the peer review process is almost like a regularizer to reality. Yeah. There are probably some ways in which it could influence your research direction a bit, but I think they're a bit overstated. Yeah.
And William?
Yeah. So I would maybe slightly disagree and say that I think we need spaces where we can think about research priorities in terms of AGI. And have people who are supporting that and to collaborate with that. And I've been lucky at Toronto to have other people who are also thinking about these problems from this perspective. Because I still think that there are problems that we might miss or we might approach in a different way if we're thinking about short-term things. Now I do think it's important, and in my work I'm trying to do things that we can test or do some version of and try to get more information about today. But I don't know if you would have generated the same kinds of solutions that I'm working on if you had only been thinking about short-term things. But that being said, I think it is important to be able in most of the scenarios we would think about AGI going well. At some point, there's a thing where we need to convince the research community of our ideas, and that needs to happen at some stage. So we do need to engage. But I think we need spaces where we can say we're choosing research priorities in terms of AGI and have people supporting that.
Smitha, I want to invite you to respond to that quickly.
I mean, I don't disagree. I think it's sort of like there are different processes for generating ideas, and you could start from the short term and think, how can I make sure this works in the long term? You could start from the long term and think, how does this concretize to the short term? You could think about both simultaneously, and it's probably good to have different processes with these.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and in any case, I think having some form of quality control is always a good idea.
Yes.
And nobody wants to be doing research, in a cellar without talking to anyone. That's probably going to lead to diverging into some less useful result.
Great. So let's thank our panel for a very interesting discussion.